Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to make sure that you knew about my 5-day 7-figure business school. This is an opportunity to spend 5 days with me to be able to learn the blueprint to growing a 7-figure education consulting business. During these 5 days, I'm going to be teaching you the psychology of a millionaire. We'll talk through how to identify that $1 million problem in your business. I'll help you package your offers as well as the pricing. I'll teach you my 7-figure sales process and help you identify the leads to pitch by the end of the 5 days so that way you can start making money immediately. This is a mind-blowing opportunity that you won't even believe that it's completely free. So in the show notes, you have the link to be able to sign up for my upcoming 5-day business school, and I look forward to seeing you there.
I always say emotions are like lights on a car dashboard. It just indicates that there's something that needs to be addressed. And you can address it, but you have to have a certain level of awareness to be able to see what's coming up for you.
As a former teacher, I don't believe that you have to sacrifice your purpose in order to get paid. If anybody deserves to be a millionaire, it's an educator. I'm Dr. Erica Jordan Thomas, and you're listening to 7-Figure Educator. Welcome back to another episode of the 7-Figure Educator podcast. My name is Dr. Erica Jordan Thomas, former teacher, former principal, Harvard grad, and full-time entrepreneur who has built a 7-figure education consulting business. Today, I am so excited because I have invited a very, very special guest. I have here with me Dr. Siobhan Flowers, who is a licensed mental health professional, psychotherapist, and former educator herself. She also happens to be our millionaire mindset coach in our wealthy Black educator community. And so I'm excited for us to sit down for a conversation and unpack the mindset work of this journey. And here's the thing that I hope you're going to learn through this episode. You're going to realize that it's not what you see on the surface, that there are actually some theories, some frameworks that you can be applying to the mindset things you're experiencing along your journey. And we're going to break that down in this episode. So let's go ahead and jump in. So first off, thank you so much for joining me to have what I believe is going to be a really, really powerful conversation. And so just so that way people understand who you are, I want you to start with your receipts. So can you just walk us through your educational, formal academic training, and then give us a little bit of a movie trailer of your professional roles?
Sure. So by profession now, I'm a licensed psychotherapist and have my own private practice based out of Dallas. Of course, also educator wellness consultant. But prior to that, I was a certified school counselor. Prior to that, taught in the classroom, was a 7th grade English teacher for several years. And so just kind of making that transition, not just away from like K-12 into the mental health field, but also making the transition to being, regular W-2 employee. Now I'm an entrepreneur. It's been quite a journey, one that I never really imagined for myself ahead of time. But even during my time in the classroom, my students would always tell me like, Miss Flowers, back then it wasn't doctor, it was Miss Flowers, you should be a counselor, and it's, I'm like, well, shout out to my students for seeing the vision, for because the kids are going to tell you the truth about yourself. Right. And so I started looking into it, and that's just kind of how the journey began. First with just me being a certified life coach because I wanted to have some kind of credentials behind my name. But then when I became a high school counselor, that's when I really saw the need and how deep it went. And I wanted to be able to make an impact beyond what the scope of what I could do as a school counselor. So that's when I fully made the transition into mental health. And so I've had some highs, in my field in terms of, I think a highlight was when a writer for Essence magazine reached out to me to feature my expertise in a story. The American Counseling Association has a flagship magazine publication called Counseling Today magazine. They also reached out, kind of tapped me for my expertise. So I was like, I'm really kind of making a name for myself. Like somehow people are finding out about me. And so I just wanted to just kind of double down and, increase the impact that I could have in the mental health and wellness field.
I know you're listening to this episode, and if you felt like you found your community, well, I want you to take the next step to join our community on Facebook. I have a free Facebook group, other Black education consultants just like you, and we're talking about proposals, we're talking about the next opportunity. People are collaborating and finding contracts together. It's an amazing, beautiful space that we've been able to curate, and I want to invite you to join. So go ahead and click the link in the show notes to be able to request to join my Facebook group, and I look forward to engaging with you there. I wanted to make sure that I invited you to the podcast because, so first off, Dr. Siobhan is our millionaire mindset coach in our programs. And one of the things that I greatly appreciate around your work is you have a really, really fascinating way of like infusing the theory into like mindset. Like we just know that we feel stuck, like we just know that we might feel overwhelmed or stressed, but you're really great at being able to articulate like what's the framework that's underneath that, or like that's actually like something that's happening like from a brain standpoint, and articulating that to get people to see, oh, this is something that I can tweak and change. So I would love to spend our conversation actually diving into a few of those things. And I think it would be helpful to kind of start at the early stage of business, some of the things that come up for folks, and kind of putting language to what that might look like or what that means. So, for example, oftentimes folks who are early stage of business, there is this intense fear that people are thinking through in terms of actually even starting a business, where they might feel like they're 9 to 5, they're completely unsatisfied, but there's this level of fear of, well, if I start my business, and it may not even be a vision of full time, like that means that it's on me, like the money is on me. And so when you hear that type of experience and a mental health perspective, what's underneath that? What's some language that we can put to that?
Yes, so you're right. The first thing that, the average person is going to experience is that fear, the emotion behind it. But this is when it is helpful to understand kind of what's actually happening in the brain. And so I do think, it's that educator in me in terms of really also creating the awareness around what is happening. And so the brain naturally wants to seek predictability, wants to seek safety. And when we're talking about making a transition from where you have steady employment, guaranteed paycheck, into all of the unknowns and like this sea of uncertainty, that inner part of our brain, it's the amygdala that detects threats, and it's going to send those signals of fear and anxiety like, hey, what are you doing? Like, why are you leaving the quote unquote safety and security of this job to step into something that is not guaranteed? And so I think that's something that you have to at least kind of understand. You're fighting also biology, the way that our brains are hardwired to operate. And so it's not a question of when or if, but when the fear shows up, because that you have to accept that as a natural part of the process so that you don't doubt yourself when it does show up.
Mm, so good. You're fighting biology. And I think just how powerful that is to even just reframe that of like it's a biological response, because I think some people are making it so personal that they're taking that
Yes.
as a sign of like I shouldn't be an entrepreneur
Right.
because if I have these feelings, that means that I'm not cut out for entrepreneurship. When what you've just offered up for us is it's actually biologically what should be happening. And so
Yes.
how can people reframe that? Like what are some tools that people might lean in to be able to work through that?
Yeah, so I think it's the understanding that our bodies are doing what it's been designed to do. And so we don't want to just dive into something that's going to be really risky. Our brains don't like that because the number one motivator and driver of the brain is survival, it's protection, and it's survival. So just in understanding that, again, you put yourself out there, you step outside of your comfort zone, understanding that these feelings are going to come up, and it's like that fight, flight, freeze response.
Mhm.
And so you either want to shrink yourself and avoid and play small, that's the flight part, or it's this you want to get maybe upset or angry at yourself, like, why do I feel stuck? Why can't I just do this? Why aren't things happening, fast enough? You internalize it and you're like, well, what is wrong with me, when we should not be taking it personal? Because a lot of times when our bodies do operate in this way, we don't have a choice in the matter. It's an automatic response that comes up in the name of survival. And so I think just having the language around it, the power to know and understand what's happening, and so you don't personalize it or internalize it, is so important, because then what I call like your core self can step in, not your anxious part or the part that wants to just protect you by playing small, but the part of you that you're destined for more, the part of you that really wants to operate from a place of like your self-worth and your values and what you deserve can not necessarily push through the fear. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. We have to be the ones that are grounded and still. We have to allow the fears and all of these other uncomfortable emotions to actually move through us. We're the constant. The emotions are the variables in this situation. So the more grounded we feel, we allow the emotions to come and go. We remind ourselves this is a temporary state. Again, the emotions are visitors. Let them appear and let them leave, because at some point they will go. And so I think kind of viewing it in that way, it's not going to give you, are not going to give those emotions any more power than again what you allow it to have.
Emotions are visitors. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I feel like in this scenario, I want to give our give a name to the person who's moving through these stages of business, and they're coming up with these different types of scenarios that they're faced with. So let's say that our entrepreneur's name is Sean. And so Sean decides to go after their business. They've decided to start their business. They're now starting to make some money. And what Sean may not recognize, they feel like they're working really hard. And what they unconsciously aren't aware of is they're now starting to overwork in their business. And so I think one of the fascinating things about the work that you do is in your business of Balanced Black Educator is you can talk to the nuances of identity and how that intersects with folks' experiences and what they might be experiencing from a social and emotional standpoint. And so when you hear this scenario of our entrepreneur named Sean who goes into their business and they have kind of normalized overworking, what might be some thoughts that you might have that are at play in that type of situation?
Yes. So the key word I heard you touch on is this normalization, especially in our role as educators. I tell everyone who asks me, like, the hardest job I've ever had was when I taught seventh grade English. I've had a lot of professional roles. Now, it was very rewarding and I was very good at it, but I never worked so hard. And so I think if that is kind of the only world that you know, it's very easy to equate praise, accolades, success with like this backbreaking work. And so that's the first piece that you kind of have to unlearn, is the difference between high achieving and overachieving. We're all high achieving, but we don't have to subscribe to overachieving, which I believe is kind of an overcompensation, which can be rooted in really feeling like maybe inadequate or insecure, or from a systemic standpoint, feeling like, okay, I do have to work twice as hard in order to be able to prove that I belong here, that I have a seat at the table. So there's a lot of factors, at play. And so it's really about getting to the heart of what is, their primary motivation. Sometimes people disguise overworking as really they're just hiding behind the work. And so they really don't want to truly put themselves out there, because again, it's that exposure. They feel vulnerable. They're gonna, in their minds, they're possibly putting them in a position to face like failure, disappointment, fear, like rejection, all of these uncomfortable emotions. So if I stay in the planning stages, then I don't ever have to kind of cross that to the actual like action, the doing. And so there's a lot of underlying things I'm sure we'll discuss. I'm thinking like perfectionism, procrastination, all of those things too. But I think that is the root of it. You have to unlearn that you can have success and ease at the same time.
I know you're enjoying this episode, but I wanted to pop in really quickly to make sure that you know about my event, Seven Figure Educator Live. It is the only event for Black educators who have a vision of a seven-figure education consulting business, and they are ready to make that vision a reality. You have the opportunity to spend 3 days in person with me and my team in Atlanta, Georgia, and I guarantee this is a transformative experience you do not want to miss. So to grab your ticket, you're going to need to head to sevenfigureeducator.com. Again, that's the number 7figureeducator.com, and grab your ticket before the price goes up. The link is also in the show notes. Go ahead and click, and I'll see you there. So you were starting to head in a direction where I was going to go next, because I've heard you talk about the role of procrastination in a really, really thoughtful way. And I feel like there's a relationship. Obviously, I don't have the degree in clinical anything, mental health, anything. I don't have any license in that. And I feel like there's a relationship between perfectionism and procrastination,
Mhm.
of like, if you have this image of being perfect, and if the weight of that perfect image and your ability to be able to meet that expectation is so heavy, then it's going to show up as some procrastinating behaviors at times. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious to kind of hear you talk through, like how might procrastination, which we would judge ourselves for, might be like actually like a coping mechanism or a safety strategy. Like I'd love for you to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, yeah. It's like you're delaying the inevitable. It's like you're cocooning yourself by procrastinating this kind of false sense of like safety and protection. When really, instead of deriving a sense of safety from protection, the healthier way is to derive a sense of safety through connection. But of course, that has to require you to kind of put yourself out there, which is, again, the thing that is hard for a lot of people for a number of reasons. And so they have these unrealistic expectations, like this needs to be perfect. I can't let, anyone have the appearance that I don't know what I'm doing or talking about, where your credibility gets questioned or whatever, narrative they have in their head. And so this unrealistic expectation, this has to be perfect, or I have to wait until I'm ready. It keeps you stuck. It delays your progress because you're waiting for this perfect moment that will never happen.
Mm. And so, what are some ways that you've seen procrastination show up? Because I think most of the time, for people who are high achieving, and I love the clarification between high achieving versus overachieving, which I think is really important. But I think for folks who are high achieving, when we see procrastination or think of procrastination, we think of like idle time, of like we
Mhm.
are not doing anything, or we are doing things completely unrelated, like watching Netflix, which I'm not one of those that prescribes to you shouldn't be watching Netflix. That's not me. But I've heard you talk about ways where like procrastination can actually feel productive.
Mhm.
And so, like, can you talk
Right?
about that a little bit around
Yes.
how it could, what procrastination could look like?
Yeah, it's like we're kind of psyching ourselves up by doing things that maybe on some level are helpful, but they're not the things that are going to move the needle in terms of our business or the things that the areas in our life where we really do want to grow. And a lot of times, again, what's fueling that is delaying, again, the possibility of experiencing a certain level of discomfort.
Mhm.
But we instead need to reframe that. Anytime you experience that level of discomfort in the pursuit of your goals and your dreams, that is actually where the growth happens.
Mm.
Not just personally, but of course, the byproduct also in your business. And so I think just really asking yourself, like, okay, does this have to actually be done now? Or is there something else that I'm avoiding in this moment?
Mm.
And just having that real kind of conversation with yourself, hopefully getting to a place where you can say, okay, you know what? Yes, this is important, but this is more
Mm.
important. This is actually in alignment with what I say I want for myself. And then once I can make some progress in this area, then I can come back to all of these other things that, again, you're just kind of biding your time, delaying the inevitable. Because if you really want the needle to move in your business, there has to become a time where you get out of the thinking and the planning and the actual doing. And so
Mm.
that's the difference between someone that wants to change versus someone that's actually ready to change.
Mm. Can you give us a couple of examples of what procrastination could look like, that someone could psych themselves out is productivity, or of them being productive, but actually it's not getting them towards the goal of growing their business?
Yeah, I think anything that has some benefits in areas that are not necessarily where our number one priority is in terms of, our business. So I think a lot of times like, maybe personal development, things that are actually good, going to the gym, maybe, working out, I say like meal prepping, all of those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
You feel good doing it. Perhaps, your future self also thanks you for that, but also the part of you that wants a successful business, where are the actions that are in alignment with those things too? So I do think there's room. Obviously, there needs to be room for personal development in that, because at the end of the day, your business cannot outgrow you as a person,
Mm.
your limiting beliefs, the level that you take care of yourself physically. So all of that is important. But again, it's direct alignment. And so
Mm.
again, having that real honest conversation with yourself. Yes, these things are important. However, what am I really avoiding in this
Mm.
moment? And so that's a good reflective question to ask yourself.
So what came up for me as you were talking is I thought about the people who always want to get another certification or another degree. And obviously we're two Black women who have 3 degrees. So like we're not saying we're anti-degree, but I was having this conversation at my tour just a week ago where someone came up to me and their reservation and wanting to move forward in their business is they felt like they needed another certification. And I think it's interesting to reframe that as procrastination a bit of when you make yourself believe that in order for you to be able to do the work, you have to get another certificate or another
Yeah.
degree, which I think oftentimes comes up for those of us who are Black educators, where
Mhm.
we highly value being seen as competent. We highly value like credentials. Like there's this really, really fine line between, okay, do you actually need
Right.
that credential, or is it some disguised procrastination? And one of the words in change management, which I think it's helpful in hearing the way that you support our clients, I've made a lot of connections to change management of
Mhm.
like leading change with people. And now it's like I'm leading change within myself.
Yeah.
And there's a term of work avoidance where
Mhm.
you're intentionally doing things to avoid the hard work that's
Yeah.
required for change to happen. And I think
Yeah.
that's a way that I think about procrastination. It's like, oh, it's a form of work avoidance, of
Mhm.
avoiding the actual work to grow your
Yeah.
business.
In a way that feels productive because, oh, I'm getting another certification.
Right.
And I think another layer to that is almost deeper feelings of, am I worthy and deserving of this with all of the talents and skills that I have now? And so you peel back enough layers and there's some, self-esteem, self kind of work in terms of, your value that you place on yourself and how you believe other people may perceive you as well.
All right, so let's go back to Sean. And Sean has kind of started to recognize their patterns in terms of the ways that they're overworking. They've worked through that, they've made some adjustments, and their business has continued to grow. They've reached really meaningful milestones in their business. They're making consistent money, and not just any money, they're making really good money. And then they hit a little bit of a ceiling, and they are now starting to experience some shifts that are happening with their family and friends, where they've been so successful in business that now they're starting to observe that, oh, the way people perceive me, or I'm just starting to see shifts in my relationships. And they're kind of just struggling a bit with like
Mhm.
that kind of unexpected reality of there's now this evolved version of themselves in business, and it's now impacting relationships. And so what would be kind of your read and take on that situation for how to navigate that?
Yeah, so that's a big one. The first word that I thought of hearing you speak is just about identity and how our concept of self changes and evolves as we reach, new levels of success. But then also it's a mirror in a lot of ways in terms of, other people projecting perhaps their own
Mm.
insecurities on you. And so being mindful of that again ahead of time. If you know possibly what to expect, none of us can predict the future, but if you have an awareness around the things that could potentially happen, when they do show up, again, it doesn't blindside you as much, but you're able to see it for what it is. So the main thing is to not internalize when other people may tend to project, or maybe from a place that they don't understand, because the average person is not doing the things that Sean
Mm.
is doing, in their lives. And so I think, again, just having that ground level awareness and understanding that, again, not if, but when these things happen, normalizing in the sense that this is also a part of, the evolution, not just of your business, but of self as you grow.
One of the things that I've found a lot of people in our community are navigating through, and I think it's a reality for Black entrepreneurs who didn't necessarily come from money, is there's this shift in identity. And then there's almost like a sense of loss or like
Yes.
grief that folks have to navigate.
Mhm.
there's the grief and loss of relationships. I've gone through that of like, as my business has grown and developed, I've evolved as a person, and now I don't fit in into certain
Mhm.
places anymore. Certain relationships aren't as easeful as they were before.
Yeah.
And I think there can also be a little bit of, some people might call it like survivor's guilt, right? Of like,
Mhm.
I have been able to accomplish these things, and then I look back and my family is, in or people I grew up with, like we're
Yeah.
in very different places.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the strategies? Like how should we think about that as people who
Mhm.
are making money, and we might be the first in our families to make money or the first in our social circle to make money? Like, what are some things that we might anticipate could come up or we might experience,
Mhm.
from a social and emotional standpoint, and what might be some tools to navigate that?
Yeah, so I think that guilt is a real emotion, like that survivor's almost remorse in a sense,
Mm,
because also this feeling of like, okay, you made it. We could say Sean made it, but maybe Sean feels like he has to also save everyone in his own family, from his old neighborhood, all of these things. And so sometimes that leads to people questioning themselves, like, well, why me? Like, what makes me so special? Am I going to be able to sustain this? Is this
mm,
something that is going to all be taken away, tomorrow? And so, again, just facing head on those fears, the insecurity, not accepting it as fact, but at minimum, just acknowledging those feelings
mm,
and not viewing it as, okay, a scarcity mindset. It's part of what makes us human. When we have things that better our lives, we obviously want to hold on to them, but there's also this fear, again, the what ifs
right.
can take over. And so, but to your point, I think it's important, like you said, it's the knowing yourself, your receipts, the hard work, the planning that went into getting to where you are today. It wasn't a fluke. Nothing was like handed to you. And so just reminding yourself who you are, whose you are, where you come from, all of those things that can really ground you in those moments of
Mhm.
uncertainty.
Are there any other common kind of mindset traps or common mindsets that come up for entrepreneurs, specifically Black entrepreneurs, as they're growing or their business that you've observed?
Yeah. And I think this kind of originated from, again, just the Black educator space and all of the ways that, I have seen, even in my time as an educator experience, kind of being othered. And so even though
Mm,
it was, when you think about uh, institutional, oppression, it's education is one of the largest and oldest institutions that exist. So you have to expect, again, it's going to show up in that environment on some level. And so, and again, it's just kind of a mirror or a reflection of what is happening in
mhm,
larger society, unfortunately. But I think, again, depersonalizing it, you want to acknowledge that these things outside of yourself do directly and indirectly impact you, but not to use that as like a limitation for what is
mhm,
possible for you. And that's why I think being in community, like-mindedness, in mind and body and actions and behaviors is really important. And this idea of being able to see what's possible in others so that you can believe that it's possible
mm.
for yourself.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So good. So good. Thank you so much
Yeah, this
for
was great.
taking time to be able to join me for this conversation, to be able to share your expertise, with our audience. And if you just had any parting words or final advice for folks who are on their journey of growing their business, what would you offer up?
I would say embrace the fear. The fear itself is not the enemy. We want to get out of the habit of assigning like positive or negative to emotions. Just allow them to be. I always say emotions are like lights on a car dashboard. It just indicates that there's something that needs to be addressed. And you can address it, but you have to have a certain level of awareness to be able to see what's coming up for you. And in that work, to not be attached to the outcomes, to try to remain as neutral as possible. And again, just see it for what it is. It's information that's going to inform your next step, but to not internalize it.
Mm,
You can make mistakes, but not feel like you are a mistake. So you have to depersonalize it and not let it get in the way of what you know is possible.
So good. So good. Well, that is what we have for today's episode of the Seven Figure Educator podcast. It's my hope that you've been able to take a number of nuggets from this episode because this was just so, so good. And if you have found value in this conversation, please, please, please share it with a friend because the more the merrier. Sharing is caring. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that way you know when the next episode drops. We'll be back here next week with a new episode. We will see you soon.